It's lovely to be here, and I'm just super impressed by the presence of cake. I don't think I ever want to go to a conference without cake, ever again. As David said, that we're from the Invisible Difference Project. I just want to talk very briefly about how we're going to structure this next little bit of time. Mathilde and I are going to introduce ourselves and introduce our own research and talk for about 25 minutes, half an hour, and then we're going to open up to questions and debate from all of you, which is, I think, when we talk more about the way we're going to present and our own research, it will become clear that's selfishly, that's really useful for us. The questions that you kind of bring to the position we are at the moment is really, really helpful. So that's me, right before we even start, saying, please ask some questions afterwards. Good. Do you want to start?
Yes, of course. See, I've got a more powerful one. So we've titled this presentation Shifting the Boundaries of Authorship and what kind of different bodies teach the law, but I must confess that I sort of started with a conclusion and the last finding of our project. But so if you don't quite get it now, hopefully you're at the end of this presentation. So we're going to be talking about intersecting law and dance, as you've just been taught, and it's going to evolve around the idea of authorship, owning your work, owning your body, collaborating with people who share what and how when it comes down to sharing the work, disseminating the work, controlling the work. So that's the general theme of this presentation. The project, so the Invisible Difference Project, if you haven't encountered any of our team members yet, as I said, investigate intersections between dance, law and disability. We have quite a large team of 8 core researchers, half in law specialists and the other half are dance specialists. And we're basically looking at how can we better support the integration within our cultural landscape and heritage, the work of professional disabled dance artists. Are they there? If not, why are they not in our cultural heritage as much as any other artist within the art form of dance? Could the law do anything about this? Is it the relevant instrument to help and support artists in dance in general, but even more so when they have disabilities? So yeah, that's pretty much what we're about.
And I think it's perhaps useful to add, as David mentioned in his introduction, I think we recognise this as a very unique intersection, and I think we continue to recognise there are still lots and lots of questions that I think as a team we all start to, well, everything that you might imagine about legal and dance professionals being in a room together, asking research questions, have kind of presented themselves and it continues to be a very unique and provocative intersection between 2 different disciplines, and I think it's really, it feels important to me to share that aspect of the research as well. So our position within the research is Mathilde and I are both PhD candidates. My PhD is based at Coventry University. I'll let Mathilde talk about her own research in a moment. So my background is in dance. I have been working as a dance artist, a disabled dance artist, in the professional sector for 16, 17, many years, lots of years, ages. So my experience has been always I trained in dance and then I worked as a professional dancer, and I shifted almost accidentally into academic research kind of at the end of my professional performing career, or traditional performing career. And 2 years ago I started to have conversations with Sarah Watley, Professor of Dance at Coventry, who has a long history of work and research into the area of dance and disability. So I've kind of been aware of her writing and her practice. And she contacted me to let me know that this PhD opportunity was coming up at Coventry. And it really gave me a really great opportunity to explore or think about some of the questions that have been on my mind as a disabled dancer working in the dance sector generally, and an artist that had seen many changes or kind of been involved in key points in the history of dance and disability, for want of a better phrase. I'm sure there is a better phrase. And one particular question that I had and still have now, and this feeds my research, is having been on the scene, the emergence of companies like Canduco and Stopgap and professional inclusive dance companies, where there are many conversations happening about how we improve access or participation in professional dance for dancers with disabilities. And what was my question, having been involved in that initial impetus, which was around the mid to late 90s, and now I don't see, for me there's a discrepancy between those original conversations and the amount of disabled leaders working within the professional dance sector. So really that's the core of my research. It's looking into leadership, the evidence for the opportunity of leadership roles for disabled dance artists. I mean, I'm going to talk about this in more detail, but that's the core of my research: dance, disability and leadership.
Right. My research focuses on law and more precisely intellectual property law. So everything that has to do with copyright, with legal authorship or ownership of art forms and artworks. That's what I'm focusing on. It's not the only law we'll be considering as part of the project, because other of our participants and team members are specialists in the field of human rights or medical law. And actually there was another layer of intersection that was very interesting, because each law sort of sees the individual as a different, with a different agenda. So our project was very much also about challenging the view, for instance, in the medical law area field of, the individual as the patient, there's somebody to cure. So that was one addition to our investigations. But as I said, I'm only focusing on intellectual property, so all I see when I'm working with our collaborators, artists, the ones we work more closely with as part of the project, was the artwork, them as an artist rather than them as patients or impaired individuals or anything like that. So I'm looking at how can the law and how does the law interact with the artist, and will it matter whether you have different abilities or not? That's about it.
In terms of kind of key themes, we've tried to kind of use the voice of disability as, for me, this whole idea of where disabled dancers are positioned in a wider dance sector or dance community have become really key to both my research and the research, the invisible difference research more generally. So what I wanted to share today was just some key points that are arising for me about the voice of disability in dance. So one of the things, and I'm sure that I'm on familiar territory for lots of you here, one of the things that I've encountered a lot is a notion of dance as a normative environment. And I use those terms normative, really, I recognise and acknowledge the kind of whole school of thought around social construction. That's all very interesting. I'm engaging with all of that, so I realise this is quite, I'm reducing it down to one term just to kind of be succinct. So, recognising dance as a normative environment and a continued normative environment, even though there are signifiers of change and progression, actually, I would argue that it is still primarily a very normative environment within which there is an embedded tradition of, I changed this on the train, and because we're on a memory stick, I changed specific to an ideal body, because I wanted to nod to an idea that actually, I think the ideology of the body in dance is perhaps a more useful way of looking at it. And I'm pointing here to Petra Cooper's writing on the danceable body, which has been really, really useful for me in my own research, and actually particularly her writing that the danceable body, the ideal body in dance at its most extreme, is inaccessible to everybody. It's accessible to a tiny, to a kind of fantasy body. It's a body that doesn't exist, which I find really interesting to engage with. So that's a question that I keep coming back to, about if we perpetuate this notion of of an ideal body, that this is preventative and restricting for dancers with a non-normal body, whatever that is, or however we engage with that. I've included access to participation and training on this slide, and I put it on all the slides at every conference that I talk about. And actually, when I first started this PhD research, I consciously said to my supervisor, I don't really want to talk about access to participation and training because everybody always talks about that, about inclusive dance. Loads of people have done lots of research on it, and actually I want to do something that moves on, that is progressive. And actually what I've found through my research so far, through speaking to dancers, through reflecting on my own practice, is that access to participation and training for dancers with a disability, disabled performers, is still a huge issue in how we view progression, or how we enable opportunities of access and progression in dance. I still see, and this kind of links to my second point, for me there is still a massively significant lack of lecturers, professors, dance tutors, dance teachers working in the academy, working within higher education, particularly dance at higher education, who have a disability. And for me that's hugely important, that if those people are not in positions of authority within the higher education system, then dance higher education system, I should say, then my view is that that means that the dance higher education system looks like a place where you don't belong if you don't have that ideal body that we talked about earlier. So I do keep coming back to it, and it is something that seems to be all the more important as I go along. And I think that links to the notion of progression to employment opportunity for personal and professional development. So actually not just about how do we access and participate in dance, but actually what do we do next? What are the opportunities for disabled performing artists, disabled dancers in the sector, and just acknowledging that that's very limited to 1, 2, 3 professional companies working currently. So then I've asked the question of where is the disabled. This for me is slightly controversial, I think. I don't know, maybe not. About where the dancer's voice is in relation to the industry overall. So really there I'm pointing at a situation of who's in charge, who are the gatekeepers to access, who are the gatekeepers to leadership, and actually what I'm beginning to uncover is that is a small percentage of probably non-disabled, probably male practitioners working in a particular area of dance, and actually I think that is still very prominent. That the and I don't know who's had the chance to read Mathilde's paper that was provided along with the slide, that's the word. But there was one, I was rereading it, and there was one particular point about the performers as puppets, and I think that's kind of what I'm nodding towards there. That actually, where's the leadership voice, not just the voice. I won't talk about, I think I've already talked about what has really shifted. So I'm really interested in an honest interrogation of what do we really, how do we really perceive disabled dance artists, and actually where are the progression opportunities, and why aren't there any disabled lecturers in higher education? And actually, I'm very happy to report this, but also it's quite worrying. When I applied for the studentship to do this PhD, which called for a disabled artist who had, I think already had been working at master's level in dance, I knew that I would probably be one of 2, possibly 3 potential applicants for that position, which is sort of worrying, and it's great for me. But I really hope that following, that's what I would like to see shift, that actually these opportunities become much more widespread, and it's less of a kind of peripheral activity.
Alright, so trying to tie back our project within the theme of the seminar series around the voice of disability, our project really realised quite early that the question of leadership and making your voice, making your mark within your field, within your community, artistically speaking, could be related to authorship. I understand of being an author, or being, you know, the source of that artwork, the owner of that piece, and acknowledging that positive status could be a key element in sort of valorizing or favouring, if you want, artists. So why are we talking about authorship for that reason? Because we think it's a potential instrument we could utilise to sort of strengthen a voice among others. So why and how authorship? Well, obviously, as I said, it's a positive social status within your field, within your community. It could also be seen as a badge of value. You're an author, you agree to attach your name to a piece of work because you're relatively proud of it and you want other people to know about it. You want to be credited when it is performed, staged, produced elsewhere. Authorship, as we'll see a bit later, can also be a source of income. And in a situation where public funding is decreasing, especially in the arts, I don't think disregarding any streams or sources of income is that way. So basically, if you're looking for funding, I think being aware of your rights as an artist and as an author could be a good way of sort of having a nice portfolio of revenues. And finally, authorship, legally or not, or just socially, is a way to control the message you're conveying through your work, a way to control the image, and sometimes when your work is so tightly close to your own physicality, to your own story as a person, whether you're disabled or not actually, you want to keep that integrity of the piece within some boundaries. And that, of course, from one artist to another varies, whether you want to have a very strict control over your work or not. However, I think having the opportunity to control your work remains very crucial to that, and especially when we're talking about performing art forms where, you know, sort of the essence of the artwork will vary so much according to who's performing it and how, when the work will change according to who you're collaborating with. I'm saying that as I'm an expert, I'm not at all. I think I will limit my propositions on the art side of things to Kate, because I don't want to say anything stupid. But that's pretty much the things I've learned from working with dance experts and dance artists. And you can see on this slide a picture of Karen Bowditch, which is one of the main artists we're collaborating with. We had the pleasure to do a lot of field work with her and observe her rehearsals as well as her work, speaking with her, interviewing her and the person she works with. And we also work with Claire Cunningham, that you might know of, Dan Doe, who else am I forgetting? You, Kate, and Shen, Welly, sorry. And yeah, these are the names, basically. Do you want to say anything?
I do. I do want to say something. I think the next slide talks more specifically about authorship in dance, but I think there's something, if I can just digress for a second. One thing that Mathilde said that I think is really valuable to share with you is when Mathilde made a comment about not commenting, about leaving the art side to me. I think what has been really valuable for us as PhD candidates and also for the research overall is to work with two very different disciplines has meant that we've really had to think about the assumptions we make in our own disciplines, which has been so valuable to many times. We've kind of, like Karen who's sitting in the front, or I may kind of go into this codified language of dance where we both know what the other one's talking about, and then Mathilde or Charlotte, who are from the legal team, might say, well, why is it? What do you mean by that? What is that term? And actually, that's been so valuable to engage with what we think we already know and actually what we can teach each other. And I think, am I right in saying that works the same way on
very
the
much
law
so.
side?
Yeah.
So I just think those things are actually just, as we're here as PhD candidates, it's probably is the one time we can talk about this point of our research. So authorship from a dancer's perspective, which is a bit more casual than the general. And I think perhaps those of us who have worked in the arts in any form, or the creative industry, creative industry is such an interesting term, isn't it? If we've worked creatively, I think we don't often think about authorship. It certainly was something really new to me to think about owning and authoring work, to really, I think that again, that the whole notion of assumption came up for me of, well, of course it's mine, or of course it's my body. Actually, in law, it isn't. officially, which I think that might be something useful to talk about in the discussion section at the end. So when we're thinking about authorship in dance, we have looked at authorship of a sign of making it in dance. So kind of reaching a point where you have progressed from a student of dance or just a dancer to someone who is authoring their own work. So authorship as a process of validation. Something that's particularly pertinent in terms of dance and disability is this notion of rethinking the icon model, which is that's my terminology. So, and it's very, well, it may not be original, but I've just written that for this. So that's just something I'm thinking about disabled performers in dance works as icons and as tools for exploring and expressing the artistic ideas of others, rather than exploring the creative ideas of them of their own. And that's very very relevant to my own experience as a dancer who danced in a repertory company for 4 years. That I was in a number of works made by non-disabled choreographers who would often come in and want to engage with their own view of what it is to have a different or impaired or disabled body, their own kind of perception of that, and that was always very interesting to me about where does the disabled performer sit in that scenario, and how can we address or explore the importance of the disabled dancer authoring and owning their own creative process, which actually is a relatively recent thing. Looking at the work of Karen Bowditch and Claire Cunningham, these are people who have really shifted into the main arena of dance, probably in the last 5 years. Would you say, Karen? Not it's not. They don't have a long. Perhaps Caroline a bit longer. So that was very interesting for me. And Mathilde's touched on this in the previous slide, but the notion of authorship as legacy or as a tool for ensuring a place in our cultural heritage, which I made a note on that on the train because it was really interesting to me. We hosted and ran a symposium in November, which was a kind of sharing about the project's research so far. And there was a representative speaking from the V&A Museum, and she was talking about an archive project at the museum, and she, correct me if I'm wrong because I'm slightly improvising, she was discussing the fact that in the archived work that's held at the Victoria and Albert Museum, there is evidence of dance work made by and including dancers with disability, but they tend not to be named. So they tend to be work by a woman with one hand, or solo by a visually impaired woman. They tend not to be kind of titled. And that really fascinated me about and it's something the project overall has talked about a lot, linking with authorship and ownership of the absence of dance and disability in our shared cultural heritage. And I think that's something that I think we all feel as our project, that the intersection between the law and dance has the power sounds a bit superhero, doesn't it? That has the potential to really address that where do we want to sit in a shared cultural heritage, and actually how do we want that to be perceived. And that whole notion of legacy, of continuation, for me particularly, is very important, because, all joking aside, I don't want to be the only PhD candidate with a disability in dance. I'd love there to be lots more and many different opportunities, because for me that will enrich, enliven, make better, make proper, anything you want to say, as I believe, in very simplistic terms, as dance should be. Very simplistic, but true in my mind.
Alright, now legal authorship, and how does it work with the work of dancers? Very simply, what does it take to be an author? At law, you need to fulfill 3 conditions. You need to fit in some categories of work, so some types of work, and there are many. You could do book, sculpture, painting, you could do dance. It could be a database, computer program, so there's a variety of work that are protected. Second, you need to fix the work in writing all the way, so in the case of performing art forms, recording it would be fine. It just needs to have some tangibility, if you want, so that very practically, if you bring it to court and say that person's stolen my work, then you could have something to refer to. And finally, you need to be original. But originality in law has had this sort of quest of not invading the aesthetic sort of judgments, and to keep it very low to something that has not been copied, and not even just a little bit copied, it just needs to be substantially different from something else. So you can use other works to make a new work that is not going to be considered as an original, but you have to have had some input at some point which make it your own, like some mark of your own creativity, if you wish. So all these conditions are quite easy to meet, and that's why we say in law that authorship is cheap. You can easily be a legal author, whether you regard yourself as an author within your field is completely irrelevant to it. If you match these three conditions, being one of the categories of work protectable by law, being fixed in writing all the ways, and being original as being not the copy of something that has been made previously, then that's it. You're an author, legally speaking. And the question that we've asked is, could dancers be authors? Because dance as an art form only reached copyright as a protectable form really recently, in the past the half of the last century. Whilst copyright has been enforced in the 18th century, we started with books, and then we moved on to paintings and cultures, and if you want sort of this form of protection, which was first created for books, was then extended to new art forms, creating a list of protectable works. And dance was one of the last ones to be added to that list, just before database, just that. And but the problem there was mostly with regard to fixing the work. So of course you have some forms of notations which are quite expensive and complicated, like the lab notation. However, with the development of recording technologies, it's made it more and more easier and easier for you to fix your work and then to access authorship and copyright and all the sort of sub-rights it means, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So can dancers be authors? Yes, the voice of dancers can be protected if you see it this way. Now the question we've been asking is whether, if you're disabled, does it change anything? Can a disabled dancer be an author? Well, legally speaking, yes, because if you want, in a way, copyright is aligned to disability. When the law is looking at whether work or an artist is eligible to copyright, it doesn't look at the artist itself or herself, it looks at the work. The only focus and conditions that you need to meet are attached to the characteristics of the work, not that of the artist. So if you're disabled, it doesn't matter, because the law doesn't even look at the author to give you any protection. And second, which I probably shouldn't have worded this way, the law doesn't take into consideration aesthetic value, but we consider it as being an important parameter of copyright law when we're looking at work made by disabled dancers, is the fact that law doesn't judge on value. It's not going to give you more rights because your work is regarded by its peers as being valuable, as being aesthetic, as being great work. There is no merit assessment in giving you copyright. Only the three conditions I've talked about. You just need not to be copied, fit in the categories and fix it. And that mattered in the context of dance made by disabled artists, because having such different bodies, there was very little narrative. There is still little narrative out there to critique the work and to say what is good or bad dance made by disabled dance artists. And also bringing on the stage such different physicalities could have been a bit challenging the traditional aesthetic of the art form. So there's this sort of maybe reluctance to embrace it and consider it as poor art or poor work because of having different bodies displayed or staged or choreographed. Where here copyright does not engage with that issue and sort of bypass it, which is here quite fortunate in this regard, because it can favour the accession for disabled dance artists to authorship, just as basically it's just as easy as a non-disabled artist. I'm not saying that there are not other practical issues coming into play. Maybe the fact that you need assistance to create and things like that might sort of challenge your authorship, because you might be finding yourself in a joint authorship position. But if you're a solo artist working, whether you're disabled or not, theoretically speaking, and in this simple scenario, then it doesn't matter whether you're disabled or not. Copyright is sort of blind to disability in that respect. So that was one of the early positive findings of our research, really, and that's what we've been working on and working from since 2013. Me? Oh, okay, that's me again. So basically, I've been talking about so far is how could the law support the work made by disabled dance artists, and that's sort of what we started. That was our starting point. What could the law, could the legal framework be better worded, better implemented to better embrace diversity in the cultural landscape when we're talking about dance? But as we went along, and as I've been interviewing people and discussing with my non-lawyers on the team, I realized that actually it's more of a two-way street than just us looking at the law as a way to support dancers. Because we learned a great deal about what it is to create, what it is to make work, and actually we've realized that the law is quite flawed. We have a very odd and archaic and very traditional way of seeing the process of creating work, especially when it involves performances. And this became a way of informing, in order to better the law, in return, us trying to support the work made by disabled dance artists. So really it went from us seeing the law as a support to the law being informed and bettered in return by our investigation and by our collaboration. And one of the key findings, which is basically essentially my thesis, evolves around the idea of the ideal body, and seeing that dancer as this impossible perfect body, or the ballerina if you want. And what I've realized really quickly is that the law actually sees that ideal body being the same for any performance across any disciplines involving performing. Because what it does is recognizing authors as being creative individuals, but performers not at all. All performers are regarded as puppets in the end of the authors. And the reason behind that vision of the performer as somebody and creative is because it believes that they're all the same anyway. It wouldn't vary from one person to the other to perform that dance or to play Hamlet. It wouldn't change anything because they all have the same body, they all have the same story. And what looking at disabled dance or disability dance, more than any other practices maybe, is just making it so obvious that actually performing doesn't just take reading aloud a script or just doing what the choreographer tells you. There's a real process of embodiment, which means that you need to know your own skills, need to know your body, need to know how to use it. And that process is a skill, it's a craft, and it is actually creative. And as such, maybe we shouldn't divide authors on one hand and performers on the other that much. Maybe there is possibly a different kind of creativity, but both are as valuable in that dissemination of the work to the public, because both are necessary. If you have a script, or if you have a dance, if you've got no performers or actors to play it, how are you going to convey a message? You can't. You need those performers. So they're necessary, but more than being necessary, they're also creative and valuable, as in they have to add something to your work for it to be performed. No work is readily performable because there is no identical performers. I don't know if this is sort of clear or not, because to me it's so striking, and I've been in it for like 2 years or so. And and people are like, well, actually, why do you need disability to show that? It's like, actually, because we've been regulating performances for centuries and nobody noticed that actually from one performer to the other there are differences. So maybe what you needed is a strikingly, because of our used to seeing normative, so to speak, body, a strikingly different body to show that actually it takes something to perform. It's not just like this, walking on a stage, saying your words, or doing free paddleboarding across the stage to, hey, here you go, that's French, so I have an advantage here. So this really vision of the ideal body is implicitly present in our law, even in areas of law you wouldn't expect to see it, such as intellectual property, because it really sees the creativity as something intellectual, so the mind only is protected. So So a performer being an artist using its body, or his or her body, sorry, then becomes something less valuable, something accessory to the great creation of the author that we tend to call author genius in law or in the legal scholarship. So this is sort of the return, or sort of the other way of that street, which sort of emerged from our collaboration.
Which has been a very interesting street, because as well as, I think, forcing the law to think about, well, actually, it's not all the same, and it also forces our thinking in the dance area of research to question. I mean, we had a very long and interesting discussion across the table a few months ago about the word embodiment, which for the dance, we use it all the time, and then the law said, what do you mean by embodiment? And actually, it's really difficult in dance, because it just is, and then we all start doing this, it's just this. It's just like this, that's what it is. With these lawyers opposite them, what are you doing? So, because it forces us to think about, what is that process? What do we bring to this process of creating a work? And actually, that if Mathilde makes a solo on me, using my improvisation and my embodied experience of what I bring to the rehearsal studio every day, and then asks Karen to learn my part, it's not me. It's not me. So where am I in that work? Where's the process? And I think that's been really interesting for us as dance. So that's such a fascinating exchange, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, but to be fair to disciplines like performing theories and even dance studies, there has been work on trying to show some data actually of this process of performing. However, it's hard to understand when you're not in that field. And even in musicology, they make graph with like different performances that are turned into dots on like a scale or something, which is completely inaccessible and frankly not really usable to bring to policymakers and say, see, performers are creative, look at those dots, they're not the same all day, and it doesn't work. And actually showing works that are made more accessible to non-specialists in the way civility dance does it, I don't think I've come across any other practices that makes that process really accessible for non-specialists. So that was a great sort of input and value for us of studying that work, and hopefully it will work. So yeah, my point and hopefully my conclusion would be that, when we're thinking of reforming the law, which sort of frame the protection of artists, performing or authors, performing artists, we shouldn't really be looking at those who are making the big bucks like Beyonce or Shakira. We should be looking at those who actually inform you on what's happening on the stage when those people are performing, and we should probably be looking at civility dance rather than those who are leading the box office. Because actually, apart from showing a great economic leverage, which is what copyright is partly about, it doesn't inform you at all about what it is to perform and where the creativity or value in those different art forms lies. And copyright is actually set to encourage creativity. Implicitly it says encourage creativity that makes money, but the word of that law, it says we're encouraging all creativity to make sure that we have a diverse cultural heritage and a diverse cultural society. So if we actually want to live up to those goals, we should probably be looking at other forms of art or other artists, the ones that truly inform you, like disability dance, Caroline Bailwich and others, not that many others actually, sadly, but rather than, I don't know, Shakira, even though her hips don't lie, actually here, it's just not so useful.
That's true.
Oh yeah, well I've just said that, yeah, we should be looking at different artists, the ones that truly inform you rather than, make a lot of money.
So this is Dan Dorr, who's one of our, he's one of our associate artists, and on the previous slide was Kimberly Harvey, who we didn't mention, who's on our advisory panel. She's involved in the project as well.
That would be it. Thank you very much.